Hello, and welcome. I'm so glad you're here today. You're about to hear an inspiring story of resilience, cunning, and ultimate triumph. It's the story of Lila Sinclair, a woman who was betrayed by her ex-husband and best friend but didn't let that define her. Instead, Lila used her pain as fuel to take back control of her life, her company, and her reputation. This is a tale of revenge, not the petty kind, but the powerful kind that comes from hard work, patience, and strategic planning. Stay tuned, because this is a journey you won't want to miss. At 38 years old, Lila Sinclair stood in the elevator at Corvex Technologies, an architecture and tech firm she had once helped build from the ground up. The glass walls reflected a sharp image of her, calm, composed, but burning with a quiet fury. She stood next to Jake, her ex-husband, the man who once promised to build a future with her. Now, he was the CEO of the company they had founded together. And she, once the chief operating officer, was nothing more than an outsider. 2 years ago, he had orchestrated her ousting, using their divorce as a way to strip her of everything she had worked for. But today, everything was about to change. Jake's smug smile, once a source of comfort, now twisted Lila's stomach into knots. His arrogance and betrayal had been his downfall. What he didn't know was that Lila, while lying low, had been planning her return, not just to the company but to reclaim the life he had stolen from her. She wasn't just a victim of betrayal, she was about to teach Jake and his accomplice, her former best friend Nora, the most expensive lesson of their lives. As the elevator doors opened to the executive floor, Lila knew this moment was her reckoning. Her quiet, calculated revenge was now in motion. Lila had spent the last 2 years building her strength. And today, the world was about to see what she was capable of. This wasn't just about getting back what was taken, it was about regaining control, proving her worth, and dismantling the empire Jake had so arrogantly thought would stay his forever. As the days passed after her quiet exile from Corvex Technologies, Lila began to sift through the wreckage of her life, carefully piecing together the pieces of the betrayal she'd suffered. The first hint that something was amiss came when she received a call from her old assistant, Ruby, who had been unceremoniously fired by Jake after his takeover. Ruby, now working for another firm, had heard whispers in the industry about Corvex's sudden financial struggles, a situation that seemed out of place for a company of its caliber. Intrigued, Lila began investigating, digging into public records and financial reports. What she uncovered was a web of deceit so complex it was almost impossible to believe. Jake had been moving money around for months, using creative accounting to cover up Corvex's mounting debts and inflating profits to maintain a steady stock price. But it wasn't just the financial fraud that caught Lila's attention, it was the sudden spike in unexplained transfers to an offshore account she knew Jake had opened under false pretenses. More disturbing was the involvement of Nora, Lila's former best friend, who had always been a confidant in both business and life. Through the emails and text chains Lila uncovered, it became clear that Nora wasn't just an innocent bystander, she had been working alongside Jake to manipulate board decisions and undermine Lila's position in the company. Even more chilling was the realization that Jake and Nora had been quietly planning to take full control of Corvex Technologies by orchestrating Lila's ousting, fabricating false claims of mismanagement, and manipulating the board to approve a questionable series of financial decisions. Each new discovery made Lila's blood boil with anger, but it also stoked a quiet resolve within her. Her suspicions about their betrayal were now confirmed, and it was worse than she had ever imagined. But rather than react impulsively, Lila took a deep breath. She had always prided herself on her ability to see the big picture. And now more than ever, she needed to remain focused. This wasn't just about personal vengeance, it was about the survival of the company she had built with Jake, one that was now teetering on the edge of collapse. The more she uncovered, the more she realized that the corruption ran deeper than she had ever imagined. And the need to take back control had never been clearer. Armed with knowledge, Lila knew it was time to strike back, not recklessly, but with precision and purpose. The game had changed, and now it was her turn to play. As Lila continued her investigation, she soon realized that Jake's and Nora's manipulation extended far beyond financial fraud. Their scheme to take control of Corvex Technologies had been methodical, intricately planned, and executed over the span of months. The more she uncovered, the clearer it became that they had manipulated not only the company's finances but also its people, turning board members and employees into pawns in their power play. The first shock came when Lila discovered the evidence of forged contracts and falsified performance reports that had been submitted to the board to justify her ousting. These documents claimed that Lila had been making questionable decisions, that she had failed to meet company targets, and that her management was leading Corvex toward a financial collapse, accusations that were not only false but designed to tear down her reputation. The board, many of whom had always been loyal to Lila, had been swayed by these fabricated reports and Jake's manipulative charm. They never questioned the evidence, trusting the numbers without scrutinizing the source. It was a perfect setup. And Lila realized too late that Jake had been working on this for months before the divorce was finalized, carefully setting the stage for her removal while positioning Nora as the perfect replacement to stand by his side. The more Lila dug into the financial records, the more she found that Jake had used Corvex's own resources, the money that should have gone into growth and innovation, to fund his personal endeavors and lavish lifestyle. He had been funneling large sums of money into investments that not only benefited him but also put the company at risk. The move that hurt the most was discovering that Jake had used Nora's influence to align himself with the most influential investors, securing new funding for Corvex under the pretense that it was part of a new direction. Yet, as Lila sifted through the confidential documents and emails, it became clear that this new direction was nothing more than an attempt to sell off valuable assets and restructure the company in a way that would give Jake and Nora full control. What shocked Lila the most, however, was the complete lack of remorse in the emails between Jake and Nora. In their communications, they spoke openly about how Lila's departure had been planned from the start and how easily they had manipulated the board into believing their lies. "It's like they handed it to us on a silver platter," Jake had written to Nora in one email. "I never thought she'd be so gullible. She really thought she was untouchable." Lila's heart sank as she read their words. The betrayal so deep it almost felt like a physical blow. They had thought her naive, weak, a woman scorned by her husband and best friend, and assumed she would simply fade into the background. But Lila wasn't finished. She had been underestimated, manipulated, and discarded, but she would not go quietly. With her investigation now complete, Lila understood that the only way to take back control was to use Jake's arrogance against him. She couldn't rely on traditional methods, she needed to be smart, strategic, and one step ahead of everyone. Armed with all the evidence of Jake's wrongdoing, the fraud, the embezzlement, and the corporate sabotage, Lila was ready to make her move. She began laying out her plan in secret, reaching out to key figures she had worked with in the past, as well as new allies she had cultivated through her consulting work. She knew Jake wouldn't see it coming. He believed the company was his now, that he had won and that Lila's role in Corvex was nothing more than a forgotten chapter. But Lila wasn't done with him. Not by a long shot. Every small detail of the plot she had devised fell into place: legal strategies, insider deals, and an alliance with a private equity firm, Phillips Jensen, which had been keeping an eye on Corvex for years, just waiting for the right moment. Lila had found it. Jake and Nora had taken too much for granted. They had underestimated her. Now, it was time for Lila to expose their deception and take back what was hers, Corvex Technologies and the life they had stolen. Lila's plan began to take shape as she carefully mapped out each move, ensuring that nothing would be left to chance. Armed with the damning evidence she had uncovered, the forged contracts, the fraudulent financial reports, and the hidden offshore accounts, Lila knew that the first step was to secure a powerful ally. That ally came in the form of Phillips Jensen, a private equity firm with a reputation for aggressive acquisitions and a keen interest in tech firms like Corvex Technologies. They had been eyeing Corvex for some time, aware of its potential but wary of its faltering leadership. When Lila approached them with an offer they couldn't refuse, they were immediately on board. Phillips Jensen agreed to back her, not only financially but also with the resources and connections needed to orchestrate a hostile takeover of the company. Their involvement would provide the necessary firepower to challenge Jake's leadership and take control of Corvex. The plan was simple but brilliant in its execution. Lila's first move was to strategically purchase shares in the company, buying up stock from disgruntled employees and investors who had lost faith in Jake's leadership. She knew exactly how to manipulate the market to her advantage, taking small but calculated stakes in key areas of Corvex without raising suspicion. By the time she had accumulated enough control, Jake would have no choice but to accept her presence in the company, whether he liked it or not. But stock purchases were only the beginning. Lila needed to build a case against Jake and Nora, one that would expose their financial malfeasance and corporate misconduct. She enlisted the help of Max, a corporate lawyer who specialized in fraud investigations, to ensure that all her actions were legally sound. Together, they worked meticulously, compiling every document, email, and financial transaction that could tie Jake and Nora to their deceit. Their careful preparation left no room for error. Once the deal was done, there would be no turning back. As Lila moved forward with her plan, she carefully calculated the timing of each step. She knew that she needed to act quickly, but she also needed to remain patient, letting Jake and Nora think they had won. They had no idea what was coming, and Lila intended to keep it that way. The next phase involved getting close to the board members who had sided with Jake, the ones who had supported his fraudulent activities and had played a part in pushing Lila out of the company. Lila knew many of them personally, and she used this to her advantage. She met with them individually, playing the role of the trusted insider who had merely taken a break from the company. She downplayed her involvement in the takeover, instead presenting herself as a neutral party who simply wanted what was best for Corvex. Through these conversations, Lila quietly sowed the seeds of doubt in their minds about Jake's leadership and his questionable business practices. In parallel, she contacted key clients who had been abandoned under Jake's mismanagement. She assured them that the company would soon be under new leadership, her leadership, and promised to restore the integrity and quality they had once relied on. Lila's reputation in the industry was well established, and she knew these clients trusted her judgment. Slowly but surely, she began to win back the support of the people who mattered most. As she prepared for the final confrontation, Lila remained composed and focused. She had spent months building a network of contacts, gathering evidence, and positioning herself as the rightful leader of Corvex Technologies. She was no longer the betrayed ex-wife or the disgraced former executive. She was a woman who had fought for what was hers and was now poised to take back everything she had lost. Lila knew that the moment of reckoning was near. The clock was ticking, and every move she made brought her one step closer to the day she would walk back into Corvex Technologies, not as a former employee, but as the new CEO. The takeover would be swift and final. Jake and Nora would have no choice but to face the consequences of their betrayal. Lila's plan was not just about revenge, it was about redemption. About proving that a woman scorned could come back stronger, smarter, and more capable than ever. She had carefully crafted every detail. And now, with Phillips Jensen by her side, the time had come to strike. Nothing would stop her from reclaiming what was rightfully hers and restoring Corvex Technologies to its former glory. The day of the confrontation arrived, and Lila stood outside the sleek glass doors of Corvex Technologies, now ready to reclaim what had been taken from her. Her heart raced, but her face remained calm and composed. She was no longer the vulnerable ex-wife or the disgraced executive, she was the new CEO of Corvex Technologies, and it was time to make her presence known. Inside, Jake was preparing for a routine board meeting, unaware that his world was about to crumble. As Lila entered the boardroom, she felt a surge of satisfaction. The board members, many of whom had once been loyal to her, were now uneasy, uncertain about what was unfolding before them. Jake stood at the head of the table, a smirk on his face, assuming he was still in control. "What's this, Rebecca?" Jake sneered, his voice laced with arrogance. "This is a closed meeting. You're not welcome here." Lila stepped forward, her voice steady and firm. "Actually, I'm exactly where I need to be." She nodded to Marcus, who stood up from the side, holding a stack of documents. As of 9 o'clock this morning, Phillips Jensen completed its acquisition of Corvex Technologies. The paperwork is filed, and the transfer of ownership is legally binding. The room fell silent as Jake's face drained of color. He snatched a folder from Marcus's hand, his hands trembling as he read through the contents. His mind raced, realizing that everything he had built, his carefully planned empire, was now crumbling. This can't be, Jake stammered. The board would have to approve this sale. Lila's smile was cold. Actually, the board's approval wasn't necessary. Phillips Jensen acquired controlling interest through strategic stock purchases over the last 18 months, which were made possible thanks to your financial mismanagement. Jake's expression twisted with disbelief. He had never expected Lila to have been so meticulous, so calculated. He had underestimated her at every turn. Emma, sitting at the side, stood up, panic written all over her face. David, what's going on? What does this mean? Lila turned to Emma, her voice sharp. It means that the company you thought you had control over, along with your fiancé, belongs to me now. The room erupted into chaos as Lila calmly delivered the blow. David, you've lost it. Your lack of integrity, your deceit, your greed, this is the result. Security guards appeared at the door, their presence sending a final message. Mr. Morgan, one of them said, please come with us. We'll help you pack up your office. Lila's mind was clear, her goal finally within reach. She had taken back control, not through vengeance, but through the power of truth and strategy. As Jake was escorted out of the room, his furious protests fading into the background, Lila took her seat at the head of the table. Her journey had been long, but the taste of victory was sweeter than she had ever imagined. With Jake and his cronies escorted out of the boardroom, the chaos began to settle, replaced by a palpable sense of anticipation. Lila sat at the head of the table, her mind sharp, her resolve unwavering. This was the moment she had worked for, the culmination of months of careful planning, precision, and quiet determination. The remnants of Jake's reign over Corvex Technologies were now a distant memory. The board members, many of whom were complicit in the fraud, stood awkwardly, unsure of what to do next. Lila's eyes swept over them, assessing each one, her expression cold but calculating. This company needs a fresh start. She began, her voice steady and authoritative. I'm here to make sure it gets one. She turned to Marcus, her lawyer, who had been by her side throughout the entire process, and nodded. With a brief flick of his hand, Marcus began distributing the finalized documents, the terms of her leadership, the new company structure, and the list of those who would remain to help steer Corvex Technologies toward a more ethical future. Lila knew that the road ahead would be challenging. The company's finances were in disarray. Trust had been shattered, and there would be many difficult decisions to make in the coming months. But she was prepared. She had spent years honing her skills as a strategist and a leader, and she was ready to rebuild the company with integrity. The immediate task was to secure the future of Corvex Technologies, starting with restoring employee morale. She had already begun reaching out to former employees who had been let go under Jake's regime, promising them their jobs back with back pay. She knew that the employees would be key to the company's revival. They were the backbone of the organization, and she was determined to honor them. The next step was to oversee the audit of the company's books, ensuring every fraudulent practice was uncovered and rectified. Jake's financial manipulation was more extensive than she had realized, but with the help of Phillips Jensen and their resources, Lila was confident that they could rebuild the company's financial foundation and restore its reputation. Within a few weeks, the company began to stabilize, and Lila's vision for Corvex Technologies started to take shape. She implemented new corporate governance policies and ethical guidelines that would ensure the company's future was built on integrity, transparency, and sustainable growth. She also took steps to ensure that Jake and Nora would face the consequences of their actions. The SEC investigation into Jake's financial crimes had already begun, and with the evidence Lila had gathered, it was only a matter of time before Jake was held accountable for his embezzlement and the fraud he had orchestrated. As for Nora, her role in the scheme was not as significant as Jake's, but Lila knew that the damage had been done. It was clear to her that Nora's betrayal was rooted in her own insecurities and ambition, but Lila had no intention of letting her get away scot-free. She'd left her in the dark during the final confrontation, Nora had no idea Lila had already prepared the groundwork for the inevitable fallout. In the months that followed, Corvex Technologies began to flourish once again. Under Lila's steady leadership, the company's stock price rose as the news of Jake's arrest spread through the media. And public perception of the company began to shift. Lila received praise for her handling of the situation, and her leadership style became the model for how companies should operate with ethics and transparency at the forefront. It was a victory not just for Lila, but for all the people who had been impacted by Jake's greed and corruption. As she sat in her office, gazing out at the city skyline, one she had once dreamed of taking back, she knew she had done more than simply reclaim her company. She had shown the world that sometimes, the greatest revenge isn't in the destruction of one's enemies, but in the strength and resilience to rebuild from the ashes of betrayal. Corvex Technologies was no longer the company Jake had tried to corrupt. It was now a company that Lila had rebuilt, one that reflected her values, her vision, and her integrity. And as the CEO, she knew that this was just the beginning. The future was hers to shape. 6 months after her dramatic return to Corvex Technologies, Lila sat at her sleek new desk, the weight of everything that had transpired settling on her shoulders. Looking out the window at the city skyline, she felt a quiet satisfaction. The company was thriving, its transformation from the corrupt empire Jake had left behind to the ethical, forward-thinking powerhouse she had built was nothing short of remarkable. The stock price had surged. Employees who had been displaced during Jake's reign had returned, and morale was at an all-time high. Lila had restored Corvex Technologies to its former glory. But more importantly, she had instilled a new sense of purpose, with integrity now at the heart of every decision. As she reflected on the journey, she thought about the betrayals that had led her here, Jake's manipulations, Nora's complicity, and the board members who had blindly followed them. They had all thought she would simply fade away, a casualty of betrayal. But instead, Lila had turned their underestimation into her greatest weapon. Their arrogance had blinded them to the fact that she was far more than just Jake's ex-wife. She was a strategist, a leader, and a force to be reckoned with. What hurt the most wasn't the personal betrayal, it was the way they had tried to undermine everything she had worked for. But instead of crumbling under the weight of their deceit, she had used their actions to fuel her own rise. What Lila realized now was that she had always been strong. Jake had never seen it, nor had Nora, or the board. They had looked at her and saw a woman who had been hurt, who was weak. But Lila knew that the real power lay in resilience, the ability to get up again, even when everything around you seemed to collapse. And that was the lesson she would carry with her forever. Looking around her new office, which was now a symbol of her victory and perseverance, she thought about the future. She had come so far. But the journey wasn't over. Corvex Technologies was just the beginning. Her leadership was already being recognized in the industry, and opportunities for expansion and growth were on the horizon. The lessons she had learned about trust, strength, and the importance of preparing for the worst were now guiding every decision she made. Lila knew there would always be challenges ahead, but she was no longer afraid of them. She had rebuilt her life, her career, and her company. The pain of the past had shaped her, but it did not define her. As the CEO of Corvex Technologies, Lila had proven that no matter how deeply betrayal cut, the true power lay in the ability to rebuild, to rise again, and to create something even better. Her phone buzzed with a message from Marcus, her trusted lawyer. The SEC case against Jake is moving forward. He'll be facing charges in the next few weeks. Lila's lips curled into a small, satisfied smile. Justice was coming for Jake. But it was no longer her fight. She had moved beyond him, beyond everything that had tried to break her. She was finally free. She turned her attention back to her work. There was still much to do, many more mountains to climb. But she was ready for whatever came next. Because now, Lila knew that no one, not even betrayal, could ever stop her from moving forward. The lesson from Lila's journey is that true strength lies in resilience, preparation, and the ability to rebuild from adversity. Betrayal and deceit can knock us down, but they don't define us unless we let them. Lila's experience teaches us that the best revenge isn't about seeking payback, but about using challenges as opportunities for growth and transformation. By maintaining integrity, trusting in one's own abilities, and having the foresight to plan for the worst, we can emerge stronger, wiser, and more successful, no matter how deep the betrayal or how high the odds stacked against us.